Welcome to this presentation on the evolution of U.S. education. In this video, we'll be exploring key educational movements from the progressive era to standards-based reform and examining how these developments have shaped the schools we know today. As you watch, be on the lookout for interactive hotspots that will give you access to additional information related to the lecture, as well as quiz questions that will pop up at various points to test your understanding. Let's dive in and begin our journey through the evolution of education. Today, we're going to explore how different educational movements, starting with the progressive era and moving through standards-based reform, have shaped the schools we know today. Our guiding question is, how have key educational movements from the progressive era to standards-based reform shaped the schools we know today? Let's begin with the progressive era in the early 1900s. There were two major groups with different ideas about how schools should function during this time: administrative progressives and pedagogical progressives. First, administrative progressives focused on making schools efficient, like factories. They believed schools should prepare students to become good workers and meet the needs of an industrial society. This approach was all about order, like having grades, bells, and a strict schedule. Think of it as preserving the status quo, which means keeping things the same. In contrast, pedagogical progressives believed that schools should be more like democratic spaces, where students grow and develop their potential. They didn't want education to just repeat what society already looked like. Instead, they wanted schools to help students think critically and work together to improve society. One famous thinker here is John Dewey, who said, "Education is not preparation for life. Education is life itself." Dewey's belief in democratic hands-on learning continues to influence modern educational practices, such as project-based learning. Let's apply what we've learned so far. Here's the question. Schools today use data on student performance, attendance, and engagement to design targeted interventions. Which type of progressivism does this approach represent? Answer: this approach reflects administrative progressivism. Administrative progressives focused on efficiency and believed in organizing schools to function much like factories, with a strong emphasis on measurable outcomes. Using data to improve school performance fits with this idea of making education systematic and ensuring that schools run efficiently to prepare students for the workforce. Let's take a look at another example. Schools are seen as spaces where students and teachers work together, encouraging teamwork, peer learning, and hands-on problem solving. Which type of progressivism does this approach represent? Answer: this scenario is an example of pedagogical progressivism. Pedagogical progressives, like John Dewey, believe that education should be an organic and democratic process. They saw schools as places for collaborative learning, where students and teachers engage in hands-on activities that encourage problem-solving and critical thinking. This approach is about personal growth and development, not just efficiency. Now, let's shift to critical theory, which started in the 1920s. When we say critical theory, we mean questioning norms or ideas people accept as normal and trying to create a more fair and just society. Critical theorists wanted to challenge the idea that schools should just teach students what society already believes. They believed that schools should help students question what they're learning and the world around them. They wanted education to be a tool to transform society, not just prepare students to fit into it. John Dewey's emphasis on questioning the status quo and using education to improve society aligns with the ideas of critical theorists. They also believed education should challenge accepted norms and transform society. After World War II, schools began to change again, especially during the Civil Rights Movement. Three major events reshaped education during this time. First, in 1954, the Brown v. Board of Education court case made it illegal to have segregated schools, meaning schools separated by race. Then the Civil Rights Act of 1964 banned discrimination in education, which means schools couldn't treat students differently based on their race, gender, or religion. Finally, in 1965, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, or ESEA, provided more funding for low-income schools, making education more accessible to all. These changes didn't just end segregation, they also led to important long-term impacts. The civil rights movement paved the way for multicultural education, meaning schools began to recognize and include the experiences of people from different backgrounds. It also influenced policies like Title IX, which focused on stopping gender discrimination in education, and bilingual education, which helped students who spoke languages other than English. While the civil rights movement focused on giving everyone access to education, by the 1980s, the focus began to shift. The question became not just, can everyone attend school, but is the quality of education good for everyone? This shift brought about what we call standards-based reform that has been defined as a movement focused on creating common goals for all students to achieve, the standards measured through tests and other assessments. One of the major moments in this movement was the report called A Nation at Risk in 1983. This report claimed that U.S. schools were failing and needed to improve. Then, in 2001, we saw the No Child Left Behind Act, which increased the focus on testing and holding schools accountable for students' performance. The most recent law, the Every Student Succeeds Act in 2015, gave states more flexibility but kept a focus on accountability. In education, accountability generally means that schools and teachers are held responsible for their students' success, usually measured by tests. The focus on accountability and standardized testing, introduced by reforms like NCLB and later ESEA, contrasts with Dewey's progressive vision and his belief that education should be flexible and focused on growth rather than rigid outcomes. However, this focus on standardized testing has been controversial. One of the biggest critiques is that these tests don't account for the differences between students, especially in terms of culture and differentiated learning. Some argue that testing can limit creativity and doesn't give a full picture of a student's abilities. So, what does all of this mean for education today? From the progressive era to the civil rights movement to standards-based reform, education in the U.S. has always been shaped by debates about efficiency, equality, and how schools should function. The big question we're still grappling with is how to balance these goals, making education fair, making it effective, and making it adaptable to different students' needs. As educator Deborah Britzman once said, teaching is by no means innocent of ideology. In other words, every decision we make about how to run schools reflects certain values and beliefs about what's important.